Hello and welcome to this episode of Triggered and True, featuring renowned emotional health consultant Laura Duncan. Thank you for being here, and thank you for investing the time to learn how to take care of your soul. If this podcast sparks any questions, feel free to submit a question by going to triggeredandtrue.com, scrolling to the bottom of the page and clicking Ask. If you would like to learn more about Laura Duncan, we encourage you to follow Laura on Instagram and Facebook. Also, a great resource for you to consider is the Compassion Method Master Course. This course is a deep dive into Laura's life work, the Compassion Method. The Compassion Method is a process that empowers you to learn to see and comfort your internal pain and to discover your true self, that beautiful, wonderful part of you that has been there all along, but has simply been covered up. To obtain the master course, go to compassionmethod.net. And as a podcast listener, you qualify for a $50 discount that can be obtained by typing in the coupon code podcast50. Again, that's compassionmethod.net, coupon code podcast50. We hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Triggered and True. Laura, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm good. That's great to hear. And today we're going to be talking about something that we bring up a lot in the podcast and something we share a lot in the podcast. And we kind of wanted to revisit it to make sure everyone knows where we're coming from on this and just make sure that people have a good understanding of this very, very important concept. So today we're going to be talking about your child self. So we're going to revisit your child self. So throughout our podcasts, we talk about child self frequently, and we also sometimes use child self and true self interchangeably. And Laura, I just wondered if you could explain why that is.
So our child self is our truest self before we get covered up by shame, before we start to try to be something for love and acceptance, before shame starts to tell us that we need to do things to be good and do things not to be bad. And so, if you look at children, they're so free. They're just like, look at me. And they just are so much more connected to themselves until they start to make those changes. And so a lot of times when people as adults are saying, I don't really know who I am, a lot of times I'll have them go back to their child self and connect with, from 0 to 12 years old. Who were they? What did they like to do? What brought them joy? What was their favorite color? What was their favorite thing to do? So that they can connect with themselves at that age before they started to censor themselves, before they started to be whatever their environment was asking them to be.
And this concept of child self can get a little strange because probably people take it in strange directions at times. And I would admit that it was a little bit strange to me as well when I was first learning this. And one of the things that really helped me kind of let my guard down in this area is when we did the child picture exercise. Mm-hmm. And as I just walked through that, it was just like a light bulb was clicking for me that, oh my goodness, this is like not weird. It's real. It's tangible. It just makes sense. Have you had anybody else that's had that experience of maybe this being weird?
Yeah, definitely. Myself included. It always feels kind of like this weird thing of like, your child self is inside of you and you're trying to talk to your child self and it feels very disconnected. But like you said, when you get that childhood picture and you're able to look at it and connect with yourself, all of a sudden you're realizing, oh, even though I was younger, it's still who I am. And a lot of times, because people are always saying, like, let the past stay in the past, you got to you just move past it. That's the whole kind of, concept that sometimes keeps people from connecting to their child self because they don't understand the correlation or connection between how they process things in their early childhood development versus how they're processing them now. And one of the things I like to use, the analogy I like to use is that your adult self is like a website and your child self is your coding. And until we go back to that and become familiar with our child self and take away what you're talking about, that kind of uncomfortableness that's connected to going back to our child self. We start to get to know ourselves again and connect with ourselves and see ourselves very similarly to we'd see our own children, or we'd see, someone that we loved and cared about. Until we get to that place, we're never able to really make that personal connection with ourselves. And that's why it's really important to take away that stigma or that discomfort that comes with connecting with our child self.
Yeah, and your whole process that we talk about, the compassion method process, is very dependent on that, because the pain that we're all dealing with has an origin. And that origin came in childhood.
Yep. And it's neuroscience. It's not just my good idea with the compassion method. It's the neuroscience of how those building blocks of life contribute to our neural pathways and how we process information and how we process our emotions.
Yeah. So I want to share a listener question that I think would be very helpful to this conversation. And the question reads, hello, I recently opened an exercise of looking at a picture of 2 to 8 and then assessing some questions about the picture. Well, this is the childhood picture exercise that I was mentioning that you can find on the triggeredandtrue.com website. There's a place you can go and click, and you'll be able to download that exercise. And she goes on, what if we can't see beyond the hurt child? Or maybe there are memories that bring about good qualities, but maybe it's from an older time period. What happened to all that time, 2 to 9, that she just cannot remember? Is there a block, or is it possible I just don't have memories of this time? Just curious.
Yeah, great question, and very common question as well. When we go back to our childhood, it's very common to not be able to remember specific memories. And so for some people, it just feels blank during those formative years. But our brain is extraordinary. It doesn't dump like our phones. If we get too many pictures, we've got to upload it or delete them. Well, our brain actually has every single memory that we've ever experienced. Think of your eyes as a video camera, and think of your brain as the hard drive. And so what ends up happening is we have all those memories, but two different reasons why we can't remember them is, one, a lot of times there's pain connected to those memories, and our brain is protecting us by not showing us those memories because it knows it's going to hurt us. And so it's saying, don't worry, I won't show you. And so it's just blank. It's us disconnecting from those time periods and not being able to remember them. The second reason that we sometimes can't remember is we didn't have proper attachment to our caregivers. And so everything will feel kind of just like gray or ambiguous because we didn't have that eye-to-eye contact, that exchange that makes us be able to connect with ourselves. So if you were neglected and you didn't have emotional connection, it's going to be hard for you to recall memories. Or if we had pain in our early childhood development, which we all have to some degree, that pain will keep us from being able to see our memories as well.
One of the things I've heard you describe this is you've compared it to a pathway, and like a pathway in the forest that hasn't been used in a really, really, really long time.
Yeah.
It becomes overgrown. But down in there, amidst all of the brush and the quagmire, there is still that path that's still there.
Yep. And so as we look at that, so a lot of times for people that have no memories, I'll say, don't even do the childhood homework until you've looked at your picture for a week straight, a couple times a day, just staring at that picture. Because what's happening is you're going back to that pathway and you're making that rut become more clear again. You're going back to those memories that are there that we just haven't accessed, that they've overgrown. So our neural pathways are not clear. But if you look at that picture over and over and over again for a week, your brain starts to gather thousands of pieces of data on yourself, and you start to be able to see things and have memories and connect emotionally to yourself when you were younger. So if you do have a problem, recalling memories, spend that time before you even do the homework, just staring at yourself. We don't realize that we're connecting to so many different pieces of ourselves in that moment because our cognitive awareness might just be like, oh, I remember that t-shirt. But our non-cognitive awareness of ourselves, those pathways are being connected, even if you're not aware of it right away.
And one of the other things I've heard you talk about is connecting abstractly at first.
Yeah, kind of using your imagination, your curiosity, being able to remember what the house you lived in, being able to remember your outside of your house looked like, being able to remember what your room looked like. As we start to kind of look outside of ourselves and be able to remember things, all of a sudden we remember ourself there.
Yeah, and I found that helpful, even remembering little things like the color of your carpet. Like some
Yeah.
of those things come back, and
Yeah.
that helps
hmm
reestablish that pathway.
Because, like, for example, if you lived in your house for X amount of years, I think, weren't you raised in your childhood home?
For an extent, I changed homes when I was 4.
Okay. So then from 4 on, you were
Hmm.
in one home and you were seeing the same carpet, you're seeing the same structure, you're seeing the same process over and over and over and over again. So that in itself is a neural pathway. And then when we are able to see that, we're able to connect ourselves to that moment over and over again. So we can start to see those daily memories, those weekly memories, those yearly memories.
And one of the other reasons this is so important, to the compassion method is we talk a lot about the bigger the trigger, the
Mm-hmm.
littler you are,
Yeah.
the littler you feel, because the reality is that when everybody gets triggered,
Mm-hmm.
they're going back to their child self, whether they realize it or not.
Whether they realize it or want to, they are going back there because it's the neurological process of being triggered. You go back, you leave your sophisticated adult brain and you enter into your amygdala, your child brain, and you are thinking and acting like a child.
So when you see a bunch of adults
Yeah.
on TV or wherever acting
Yeah.
like children or at
Yeah.
a meeting, I remember sharing this
Mm-hmm.
one time with a guy, and he said, "Oh my gosh, this describes the school board meeting I was at last night." So I totally get it
Yep.
now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You look at it, if you're not in a triggered state and you're watching people that are triggered, they do look like a bunch of little kids fighting about things. There's irrational discussion, there's big emotion, there's, lack of self-control, lack of bigger picture, lack of seeing options and resources, and everything becomes very narrow and very focused in a very childlike way that there's no options. It's always going to be this way. It's never going to change. And then we have those same big emotions we had when we were children.
That there's no options. It's never going to change. That's a common theme for me when I get really in a triggered place, as it
Yeah.
feels so. In one way, I know that it's happening is just the helplessness.
Yeah, exactly. And it feels so true in that moment. And for many of us, we think that's who we are. Because, for example, let's just say that every, big meeting you went into, you felt similar emotions like that. You felt like it's not going to change. You felt stuck. You felt helpless. You start to attribute that to your identity. You start to think, okay, big meetings make me feel this way. This is who I am. Because we don't recognize that it's not who you are. It's just reminding you of something you experienced in your early childhood development that's causing you to have an emotional allergic reaction to big meetings and causing you to leave your sophisticated brain and go to your child brain every single time.
Yeah. And for me, it's more, yeah, there's like certain themes of things that continue to trigger. And for me in particular, it's whenever there's myself or a loved one has a health issue, for
Wow.
whatever
Yeah.
reason, I go right to that helpless place of
Yeah.
it's never going to change. We got to deal with this for the
Mm-hmm.
rest of our lives.
Yeah.
And it's very scary, very alone.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, so yeah, if I trace that back, I definitely have that. And I shared this when I shared my testimony with the aspect of like always feeling like there was something wrong with me, like I wasn't quite enough,
Yeah.
like there was just something a little bit off. And
Mm-hmm.
then when there is something like that, that's like confirming that, it's like
Yeah.
pressing on that pain of not feeling complete or enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And also one thing about health issues, just because maybe other listeners might connect to this, your fear as well, of when someone's sick, it's something that's outside of our control. And our adult brain functions very well in logic, things we can control, things we can fix. But our child brain, when we bump up against things that are outside of our control, it's going to be triggered and have big fight or flight reactions because it's outside of our control. You even see sometimes like someone will be sick or have health issues and we'll feel mad at them. And it doesn't make any sense because you think, oh, well, they're suffering and they're struggling, but instead we're mad. But it's really because we're in our child brain, we feel so helpless and we feel so out of control that our big fight or flight emotion is to fight. So we end up fighting the very person that we love when they're in a weak, sick spot because we're in that child brain again. And I think there's a lot of shame that can be connected to that if that's your trigger, because we're taught we should be loving and kind to people when they have health issues, and instead we're getting angry with them.
Well, I think a lot of people could relate to that, especially as they transition to taking care of their elderly parents
Yeah,
or
exactly.
or people that have to take care of children with health issues. And yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah. And I think the message that you're saying is that shame you're feeling is not, it's not who you are, because man, that would really nail your identity.
Yeah.
Like I'm a horrible person,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah.
remember actually feeling that when my husband was sick. I was so overwhelmed and so tired and, just at my end that I couldn't reason. I couldn't stay in that logical adult brain. And I remember, at the end, he couldn't chew food or anything like that. He had to have liquid food because of the breathing that he was being affected by. And I remember making him something and he couldn't eat it because it was too spicy. And I couldn't drink it because it was too spicy. And I remember getting so mad. And then, like, I literally just remembered this
Mm,
yesterday. And I felt kind of a little bit of a wave of shame, not a huge amount of shame, but I felt some shame. And I thought, wow, that was so mean he can't even breathe or eat. And he has to drink his food and it's too spicy and he can't have it. And I'm getting like rage, so frustrated with him. And then realizing I was able to give myself compassion that I wasn't able to give myself compassion at that time because I didn't have the compassion method, and be able to realize how helpless I was, how out of control I was, and be able to bring comfort there instead of shame.
yeah. Oh, wow, that's powerful. Really powerful. I'm sure that will resonate with a lot of people. Because living on planet Earth, we are all going to deal with health issues,
We definitely are,
and
and
we're all
they're
going to deal with a
outside of
lot
our
of pain.
control in a lot of ways. Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's pressing on wounds inside of us without us even realizing it.
And I think what is the helpless, where it really comes from, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this feeling that I cannot be okay if this situation doesn't get fixed. Like my
Exactly.
ability to be okay is dependent
Mm-hmm.
on this going away, this getting better.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. We have a codependency with people getting better, being healthy for us to be okay. But as painful and as sad and as hard as it is, we can still be okay if someone else is sick, if someone else isn't okay.
And we are,
We really
yeah,
are.
in
Yeah.
the internal world, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's the hopeful place. Yeah,
Yeah.
one of the things that I'll tend to remind myself of when that happens is like, okay, I've seen a glimpse.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I can live there a lot,
Yeah.
but I've seen a
I've seen a
glimpse.
glimpse.
Like I've seen
Yeah.
a glimpse to know that I know that I know deep down that I can be
Those,
okay.
yep, those glimpses are really important because they really help give us hope for the
Yes.
process. Even if we're still working on the process, even if we still get triggered, it starts to give us hope because we start to get that knowing that we really can be okay, even if we still trigger.
Those glimpses can carry you through because
Mm-hmm.
um, you can't deny what you've seen. You
Mm-hmm.
can't deny what you've
Exactly.
experienced. Like you've worked the process, you've incorporated this to a level where yeah,
And bringing
you've
it
seen it.
back to the child self, once you have a significant encounter and connection with your child self, you can't go back. Once you've seen the pain, once you've seen who you were as a child, and you feel your heart be moved with compassion, moved with love for your child self, you can't go back.
Hmm.
It may only be a seed, it may only be a small amount, but that seed will continue to grow. And that's why it's important to push through that feeling of I'm never going to see my memories. I'm never going to connect with my child self. It's too abstract. It's too weird. It's too difficult. Take the time to really spend connecting your heart to your child self, not just your mind, so that you can have that encounter with your child self.
What would be your advice be to people who are just really, really frozen? We've given some good advice and some tips and tricks of, connecting abstractly, looking at the picture over a long period of time. Like you said, you put it on your refrigerator, so you were forced to look at it. And so what would be some other advice to someone that just doesn't want to go there because that pain is so great? Like they're just not ready.
It's very common. We're all adverse to pain to some degree. One of the things that I usually do with people that are having a hard time connecting to themselves or to connecting to their child self is having them think about, what if that was your child? If you have your own children, or you have a niece or nephew, or if you have a friend that has a child that you're very connected to and close, because that really shifts it away, that will face our pain because of love. So if you are struggling to connect to your child self, so let's say you're looking at your 5-year-old picture and you have a 6-year-old, try to think about how you would feel for your 6-year-old, or how you do feel for your 6-year-old, and help connect to that love that you have for them. And then look back at your childhood picture with a similar lens. And once we feel that feeling for our child, it's easier for us to feel that feeling for our own child self as well. So that's one helpful thing, connecting to children that we already have love for, because it makes it easier for us to connect to our child self. Another thing is to be able to go back to multiple different ages. Sometimes we'll get stuck on a certain age because that age carries more pain than other ages. So let's just say we're looking at an 8-year-old picture and we just can't connect, and it just feels we're not getting that kind of connection that we're looking for. Look at a 5-year-old picture. Sometimes we're adverse to like an 8-year-old picture because we see the awkwardness, or we see the shame. But if we go back to a 5-year-old picture, we see the innocence. And we're more inclined to want to love innocence than we are to love awkwardness, or to love when we start to get covered up by our shame. And it's really significant. You'll see a huge difference between certain ages, and you'll also feel different towards different ages as well. But once you've connected to your 5-year-old, it's going to be so much easier to connect to your 8-year-old, even if she's awkward, even if she's, if she's exhibiting behaviors or looking like things you want to reject.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'll be able to see through compassion instead of shame. Because
exactly.
looking at the picture can bring up, I was ashamed of how I acted.
Yep, exactly. Sometimes we'll have a certain haircut, or we'll have a certain look in our eyes, and we're just like, ugh, our knee-jerk reaction is just, I don't want to connect with you because you make me feel shame, uncomfortable, awkward.
Yeah. And another thing you share a lot about is to go back on this journey with no agenda.
Yeah, definitely. That's a huge thing, and a strong differentiation between the compassion method and other inner healing child self modules. Because when we go back, most of the time people are only going back to take care of pain. They're not going back to get to know themselves, to be with themselves. And so when we remove that agenda of even healing, even though that's part of why we're going back, but we make the primary goal is connection, healing will follow connection in a more powerful, intimate way than the agenda of healing pain.
Yeah, the healing becomes a byproduct.
Exactly. And that's how it needs to be. Could you imagine with your own kids, if the only reason you hugged your daughter was for her to be healed, for her to feel safe? That was the only reason. You didn't love her. You didn't know her. You just wanted her to stop feeling negative feelings. But you hug your daughter because you love her and you care for her, and your heart is moved with affection for her. And as you hold her in that genuine, sincere, authentic way, her heart feels safe, feels loved.
Yeah. So connection is the goal.
Yep. Connection is the goal, not healing, even though that definitely becomes a byproduct.
Mm-hmm. Looking back at our lives of trying to help people in different ways, you work with people, and we had a whole session on, we can't help or hurt others. So, so
that's a fun one.
When we say help, it's like, guide, journey.
Yeah. Facilitate, guide,
yes.
support, encourage.
But when you look at your history, and we can probably all identify where we had those agendas when we were trying
Hmm.
to, well, trying
Yeah.
to help people
Yeah.
oftentimes does have an agenda.
Yeah. It definitely
Uh,
does. It usually is connected to codependency, like we talked about in that episode. We're not okay if they're not okay. So we have this strong drive to heal people so we can feel okay.
one of the things that's a big benefit of going back to childhood is there's so many character, and I think this is why, the Bible references Jesus encouraged us in numerous points to turn and become like a child.
Yeah.
And at one point he said, or you won't enter or see, depending on the translation, the kingdom of God. And one of the things that when we think about the kingdom of God is described as joy, peace,
Hmm.
and awe, wonder, all those things. And
Yeah.
in childhood, we had those things. I
Yeah.
mean, we had the awe and the wonder of like the Christmas season. Just think of as a child how much awe and wonder was connected to the Christmas season, or
Yeah.
whatever favorite holiday, your family traditions that you had, going to grandma's house, whatever. It wasn't just going to grandma's house. There
Hmm.
was there was there was an X factor there.
Yeah.
And it was that just the awe, the wonder,
Hmm.
what are we going to encounter on this journey?
Yeah.
And we had that in childhood.
Hmm.
And then,
Yeah.
we put that away.
Exactly. And that is definitely one of the benefits of not just going back to heal, but get to know. Because when we get to know ourselves when you're younger, we reconnect with the childlike side of ourselves, the wonder, the awe, the faith. And you're talking about, Christianity and religion, you can't connect with it, and it's a neurological process. It's not just like, oh, you should just become like little children to connect with God. It's actually a neural pathway, your emotional side of your brain, your right side of your brain carries wonder, awe, faith, and that's connected to our child brain. So there's definitely not more benefits than just even getting to know, even though that is our primary goal. It's also being able to be like a child because we've reconnected that part of our brain. Because if you kind of think about it, your left brain logic is your adult brain, and your right brain emotion is your child brain, not in a triggered state, but in your true self. And so imagine living not just from your logic as an adult, but pairing that with wonder and awe and possibility and faith. That's how our brain is meant to function.
Wouldn't maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't maybe be a better way to look at that? Because if we say that your right side of your brain is more your child brain, wouldn't be a better way to say it is that in childhood, that side of our brain is more active?
Definitely. Yeah. So like
It
yep.
develops sooner. Yeah.
Which causes the triggers, which we've talked about, of big emotions, irrational thoughts, all those
Yeah.
things. But the flip side of the same coin is when we're not in a triggered state as a child, that's what our that's how our child brain functions.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to connect with that is really important as an adult because it accesses faith. And faith, that's why most adults don't have faith. You think about like Peter Pan, the whole Peter Pan concept, and he becomes an adult and logical. And like you said, you put those things away. But when he was able to reconnect with his child self in Peter Pan, he was able to remember who he was and he was able to access that as an adult as easily as he did as a child.
And if you think about when we're as humans functioning on all cylinders, where we retain all of those aspects of that childlike nature, the awe, the wonder, the peace, the
Mm-hmm.
joy,
Yeah.
and we marry them perfectly
Mm-hmm.
with the logical side.
Yeah. They're both beautiful sides of our brain, but they're
Yes.
meant to work together. And that's where we start to enjoy life versus managing it through our logical adult brain.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what ends up happening. So why would you suppose, why is it as we get older, the logical side tends to drown out the other side? Is it just because it's where more of our focus is? It's where our education is geared towards?
So, our frontal lobe is our sophisticated adult brain that has reasoning, that has the ability to be able to process information in a safe, logical, rational way. So, we make our home there because it's safe. And then it feels scary to be little because we're identifying more with the pain triggers of being little. And so it feels so as much when you connect with pain, you connect with joy. When you connect with joy, you connect with pain. And so a lot of people would rather not feel joy because it's going to connect them with pain. So they'd rather get rid of both pain and joy and stay safe in our rational, logical brain because it's controlled. You know what to expect instead of the
Well, we
risk
have we
or the
have
variable.
the illusion
We
of
have the
control.
illusion
Yeah,
until
right.
events happen that show us that we don't. Then we go into that pain child brain. But instead of being able to recognize that we can live from as much as we'll still be triggered by the pain of our child brain, we can live in the joy of our child brain as well.
Mm-hmm. But you brought up a really good point. In order to reap the benefits of
Mm-hmm.
the child brain, we're going to have to go to that pain.
Yeah, exactly. So
There's
like
no
pain is,
shortcut, right?
yeah, exactly.
Well,
Pain
there
is
are
covering up.
shortcuts,
Yeah.
but they're imitations,
Yeah,
you know.
exactly. Well, again, that's why we want to go back to healing. You just want to heal the pain so we can be okay, versus recognizing that that pain needs to be comforted and cared for and spent time with because that pain is covering up the joy and peace and wonder of who we are.
I saw this really in action at a wedding recently. So, as most weddings go, and at least ones that I've attended in my life, the children are the ones on the dance floor cutting it up,
Mm-hmm.
having the
Yeah.
most fun. And then
Yep.
as the night goes on and some of the adults have um, partaken in some things, they can join too.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching that, and I used to have a lot of shame connected to that because I always looked at it more in terms of, well, it's shameful to have to need, because at a point in my life, I definitely used alcohol to allow myself to have that kind of free of those inhibitions and all that stuff. Well, then I attached shame to that because like that's not right. I shouldn't have to do that. And I look at it a lot differently now. And at this wedding, it was really cool because I was able to feel the joy from the children who were, probably approaching that situation more innocently, and even
Mm-hmm.
from the adults that were that needed some help. So when I said there was no shortcuts, I mean really the alcohol is a shortcut to our child self,
That's true. Yeah, definitely.
but it's a process.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas before I would have been a little bit more like judgmental, like that's
Mm-hmm.
just wrong, and now I'm kind
Yeah.
of like, yeah, it's not ideal. It's not ideal, for sure, not ideal, but yet I was still able to appreciate the fact that it was happening.
Yep.
And
Exactly.
I was even found myself, happy for the people that were able to enjoy themselves in that way.
Wow. That's amazing. Just
Yeah.
because there can be so much judgment connected to it of they're just medicating, they're just doing that, which it can also be true. But
Yeah.
you're able to see that they were able to access something through it that was actually true and genuine.
And they were doing the best they could,
Mm-hmm.
as we all are,
Yeah.
to deal with what life has thrown at us.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
um, yeah, so it's a process, and I think as we mature in our understanding of the compassion method, and as we learn to apply this more to our lives, we'll find ourselves being able to connect to joy in all these weird little places
Mm-hmm.
that we won't need,
Yeah,
an
you won't need
artificial
it. You'll
stimulant. It's just
you'll
gonna,
be in the middle of the day with, no, like that's one of my favorite things about this process that I've experienced is in the middle of the day, just getting off work and all of a sudden just feeling like a burst of joy, a burst of excitement, a burst of expectation out of nowhere. Nothing's even
mhm.
a circumstance is not even bringing it up, but I'm just connected to myself. So I connect with joy just because it's a beautiful thing to be able to connect with. And that comes from being connected to our child self.
Yeah. I would find that I would shut that stuff down. If I
Mm-hmm.
started to feel it,
Yeah.
I'd shut it down because I was scared to feel that.
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
like you said,
Definitely.
with the joy comes the
Yeah.
pain.
Yeah, we will connect with pain when we connect with joy. But as we start to be less afraid of pain and
Yes.
more trained and able to connect with comfort to our pain, it allows us to go play. And then when the pain comes up, we're not so scared the next time because we know with proper comfort, we can let go and go play.
Kind of bringing this full circle, that goes back to the hope
Yeah.
that even though that pain is there,
Mm-hmm.
I know that the
Comfort will
flickers,
come.
the
Yep,
flickers,
exactly. Yep.
there's flickers. Yeah.
And that's why that repetition of feeling your pain, getting comfort, leads us to that hope, leads us to that play that our brain starts saying, here's pain. But guess what? Pain isn't as scary as it used to be because I know comfort's coming.
As we conclude today, one thing I just wanted to say to the people listening is that, if you even if this is your first podcast you've listened to, we're towards the end of it. Unless you just fast forwarded to the end, you listened to a lot of what we had to share, and just doing that is very brave
Yeah, very brave.
because this is stuff that we don't want to talk about.
No, we don't know how to talk about. And then because we don't know how to talk about it, and because it scares us or it feels uncomfortable, we don't want to talk about it. Even when we, in our sophisticated brains, say, yeah, I want, emotional awareness and I want emotional healing and I want to just go all in because I've, met with people time and time again that are like, okay, I'm ready, I'm all in. And then they bump up against pain and they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Because the reality, learning a concept, we talk about concepts on this podcast a lot. Learning a concept can feel safe and empowering, but to actually apply the concept to our hearts, that's usually where we get a little bit uncertain about if we really want to do this process.
Well, and I think what ends up happening is as we get older, the circumstances of life will kind of box us in a little bit to where we recognize we're going to have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I, as I age, I definitely see that of when you were younger, you can ignore things, you could just kind of push through them. And then as you get older, there's like this accumulation effect of like doing that over and over and over
Yeah.
again. And it really has helped me understand why sometimes when you see older people with some really crazy idiosyncrasies, like they've developed
Mm-hmm.
some really, they're super particular about things. I
Mm-hmm.
can see where that comes from.
Yeah.
Like it's all the ways
Intricate
you,
protective systems.
yes, yes, all those protectors, they just get more and more elaborate
Mm-hmm.
and more and more.
Yeah.
And people tend to start making the world so much smaller and smaller and
Mm-hmm.
smaller. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, I would love to have it be the opposite, that as I grow older, my world gets bigger and bigger and bigger and
Mm-hmm.
bigger, not smaller and smaller and
And that
smaller.
will come from doing this process of being restored to your original design, being who you were created to be, entering into that childlike wonder that says, I believe the best about people. I believe that, people, there's love there instead of, I'm so scared and I'm in so much pain that I get smaller and smaller because this world is too scary and too dangerous and too much for me. Because if
Mm-hmm.
we start to regulate our external world to such a degree, that's where the isolation comes from, even down to temperature control. If it being a certain physical temperature, we want to become so comfortable because we're avoiding pain that we end up not being able to experience anything.
Well, no matter where you're at on this journey, um,
Mm-hmm.
Laura's definitely in one place. I'm in another, and everyone listening is in their own place. But no matter where you are, just kind of the encouragement we want to give you is that there is hope. And at first, it's just going to come as a flicker.
Yeah.
And don't ignore the flicker. Don't diminish the flicker. Embrace the flicker. And sometimes that flicker is all you're going to need to keep you going.
Yep. Exactly. And it's definitely as painful and challenging as this process can be, it leads to so much hope and joy and peace.
Yeah. And in conclusion, I want to thank the young lady who asked the question and
Yeah. Thank
encourage
you for your
you.
question.
You bet. Encourage everyone listening. If you have a question, you can submit that through the triggeredandtrue.com website as well. And thank you for your time listening. And Laura, anything you want to share as we depart?
If you also want to go back and re-listen to our original Child Self podcast, that can also be helpful if this is your first time listening. So this is just a add-on to that as well, with more information and more help in connecting with your child self.
Yeah. And the child picture exercise, also something to check out. Again, go to triggeredandtrue.com. And if you enter your email address, that exercise will get emailed to you.
Perfect. That's a great idea.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening and journeying with us. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you again for joining us for this episode of Triggered and True. We hope that you enjoyed it. As a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, go to triggeredandtrue.com, scroll down to the bottom of the page, and click Ask. And if you would like to learn more about the Compassion Method, be sure to check out the Compassion Method Master Course, which can be purchased at compassionmethod.net. And as a podcast listener, you qualify for a $50 discount, which can be obtained by typing in the coupon code podcast50. Again, that's compassionmethod.net, coupon code podcast50. Thank you again. Goodbye.